I am here today to give a lecture as one of two recipients of the 2019 Chambliss Faculty Research Award, and I am so grateful for receiving the award and for the opportunity to share my research this evening with the Kutztown University campus community. Before I get going, I'll give first thanks to my department colleague, Dr. Tricia Walsh-Coates, who nominated me for the award. Dr. Walsh-Coates, you have been and continue to be an exceptional mentor to me in my years at KU. Thank you for supporting my research program. And thanks to everyone in the secondary education department. I dedicate this talk to the wonderful people, past, I'm looking at you, Dr. Terry Staler, and present and future, that make up the community that is KU secondary education. Last thanks, before I begin, goes to my partner, Ellie Escher, my first editor of New Thoughts, and my foundation through my research journey and in all matters of life. Without your inspiration and all those late night chats, I wouldn't be here giving this talk today. Okay, here we go. What I have prepared is a review of my research program's arc over time. As John introduced and as reflected in my title today, by reviewing my body of research thus far, I aim for you to come away with the notion that mathematics education is controversial, contested, and ultimately a political domain. Some of you may be wondering about the central concept here. How can mathematics be debated? Don't we all agree that 2 + 2 = 4? Others of you may know that all education is political and know some details about other topic areas like social studies or English. But you might wonder a bit more about how those same conversations might play out in mathematics education. And also, I imagine other listeners already know a good amount about the politics of math education through your own practice or research, and wonder what I will include or exclude in the discussion today. Now, no matter where you fall on this spectrum, I have a consistent message for each of you. The ways that I've approached my research on the politics of math education, right down to the ways that I've organized my talk here, are nothing more than my own interpretations. Yes, my research is grounded by theoretical frameworks in social sciences. Yes, my research stands on the shoulders of previous scholarship. And yes, my research is rigorous, and my organization for tonight's program will display thoroughly a politics of math education and a host of open questions and challenges in it. However, my title does not intend to suggest that I am sharing the politics of math education. Instead, the title suggests that there is this thing we can call the politics of math education. I argue against the possibility for a definitive, complete, and objective declaration of the subject matter. What you see here this evening is nothing more than the Mark Wolfmeyer subjective version of such politics. And to know this subjectivity to my research, you're going to learn a little bit more about my personal studies as the context in which the work originates. Before looking at that context, let me offer some concrete examples to show that mathematics education is a political thing. The images represent two recent events, two new subjects of inquiry in my research program that are unfinished at this time. Ultimately, I will analyze them for the politics of math education, but for now, I want to present to you the basics of these events. Although brief, as an opening to this talk, I intend to share with you these so you can know a bit of what's happening currently, and more to the point, I can start to convince more of you that math education is a political thing. Both occurred in fall 2019. The first event, represented by the upper right corner image, centers on a man named Blaine Dillard. He is a father of 3 children who attend Wake County schools in North Carolina. Wake County includes Raleigh and is a populous area of the Carolinas, with considerable industry and a good amount of the professional class. Mr. Dillard himself works in an IT-related position. So here's what happened. The Wake County School District adopted a new mathematics curriculum titled Mathematics Vision Project, MVP, and Mr. Dillard initiated a parent group that opposed the school's use of this curriculum. In September 2019, MVP, the textbook company that's based in Utah, sued Mr. Dillard with claims that he made false and defamatory statements that harmed their business. Mr. Dillard countersued with claims that the suit violated his First Amendment rights. Both suits were dropped later in the fall, but the event garnered national attention and suggests a host of questions. I could pause and poll you all with the question, who do you think was in the wrong? Upon hearing the story, do you side with the father or with the textbook company? I would guess that we would not all agree, and such a poll outcome would support my claim that mathematics education is political. Moreover, here we have a highly public event surrounding mathematics curriculum, and it engaged the media and the judicial system. It resulted in cries of defamation on the one side and limiting a most fundamental basic human right on the other. And although we won't get into the details on this one, please consider how it opens the door to thinking about the following questions. What mathematical content should be prioritized in public schools? What pedagogy or method of teaching should be utilized by teachers? And stepping back to bigger questions, who should learn mathematics in public schools and for what reason? Who gets to decide the answer to any of these questions? Parents? A textbook company? Someone else? The image you see in the upper left corner is accompanied also by the text in the bottom half of the slide. They represent the second event in the politics of mathematics education from fall 2019, when Seattle Public Schools announced their newly drafted K-12 Math Ethnic Studies framework. The new curriculum began in response to a resolution from the Seattle King County's NAACP that integrated ethnic studies throughout all curriculum. Written by teachers and school district leadership, the math curriculum includes, for example, looking at the global history of mathematics and specifically by tracing developments by mathematicians of color over time and integrating mathematical classroom work with social studies topics like justice. Reactions to Seattle's new mathematics curriculum were swift and varied, mostly by pundits across a variety of news media. Critics labeled the project as an outcry that mathematics is racist. Supporters declared the new vision as bold responses to addressing the differences in standardized test scores among white students and students of color. Some of the public followed suit with stances for and against, displaying these on social media. Again, we won't get into the details on this one and the ensuing politics around the event, but hearing it causes us to consider the same questions yet again. What mathematical content should be prioritized in public schools? What pedagogy or method of teaching should be utilized by teachers? Who should learn mathematics in public schools and for what reason? Who gets to decide the answer to any of these questions? Parents, a textbook company, teachers, school leaders, someone else? With these events and questions, I expect we are now a little bit more ready to engage in the idea that mathematics education is political. In its most simple form, something that is political is something that is negotiated and decided upon by a group of people. Digging deeper, as the questions I posed start us to do, causes us to question who is in or out of the group and the ways that power can flow, distribute, and be unequal as a group comes to make a decision. I mentioned at the beginning that I am presenting the concept that there's a politics of math education and my epistemological perspective that anyone's description of the politics of math education would be subjective to who they are. So before getting to my politics of math education as displayed in my research, I will take a bit of time for an exposition of my studies. I won't plan to take too long to do this, but will move through my course of studies and work experiences as they relate specifically to mathematics education, to lead up to a discussion and presentation of select publications, like the 3 books I have written and whose cover images you see here. I'm thinking of this as an extended version of a curriculum vitae, but with the purpose of providing context for the politics of math education that I have asserted through my own research program. If you don't know, a curriculum vitae is the academic version of a resume, and professors are not limited to 1 page, but continue on many pages with the differing things displaying the course of life to include our ongoing studies, research publications, and talks we give. We can think of it as a play on the notion of curriculum. We usually think of the word curriculum as signifying the content material denoted within any one course. Like, the curriculum of an Algebra 1 course includes solving linear equations and graphing linear functions. But here, the curriculum is your whole life of study. Taking the ideas even deeper, celebrated curriculum studies scholar Bill Pinar developed the notion, the method of currere, as a look towards oneself in determining a full picture of studies. He and colleagues Reynolds, Slattery, and Taubman write, currere focuses on the educational experience of the individual, as reported by the individual. Rather than working to quantify behaviors to describe their surface interaction or to establish causality, currere seeks to describe what the individual, him or herself, makes of these behaviors. Pinar grounds the concept in a Husserlian phenomenology, emphasizing that knowledge production is rooted by the lived experience of the individual. I could take more time to describe the abundance of my experiences in schools and leading, as a student in my K-12 experiences. All of these motivated a path towards my present knowledge production on the politics of math education. But to save time, I'm going to focus here on first my undergraduate studies, move to my early career in teaching and graduate studies, and finish with my doctoral studies and emergence as a scholar in the academy. I completed my bachelor's degree at Pomona College, a private liberal arts college in Southern California. There, I double majored in mathematics and music. Leading up to college, I was always strong in mathematics. Yes, I was on the math team, but I'm not sure if someone asked me, hey, Mark, what's your favorite subject? Would I have answered math? I happened to take, though, a course for my mathematics general education requirement at that first semester at Pomona, and it was called Alternative Calculus 2. This was a more rigorous version of Calc 2 and taught by a wonderful professor, Shahriyar Shahriyari. Rather than a plug and chug course, it taught me about proof and conjecture in mathematics more fully than I had ever experienced prior. It introduced me to the work of mathematicians in a way that caused me to identify more as a math person than ever before. And it also caused me to question, why wasn't math class like this in high school? It always seemed so much more like following the rules than something that was creative and puzzling. The other images relate to my second major, music, different from mathematics. Music was a certain passion of mine in young adulthood. I came to Pomona with years of serious piano and other musical endeavors. In college, I continued performing, including my senior recital in Little Bridges that featured all 20th century composers such as George Crumb, celebrated in part for his original way of writing music as seen in the photo in the lower left. What the music degree afforded me long-term in this method of currere was an initial exposure to critical theory. Pomona being the serious academic space that it is, my music degree was as much about performing as it was about advanced theories in musicology or the study of music. I enjoyed the mathematics of music theory, yet what pulled me most into new directions were the researchers in ethnomusicology and music history that focused on a concern with the social aspects of music. For example, with my professor, Catherine Hagedorn, I read about feminist interpretations of Western music and learned about advanced social theories on race and social class when learning in her ethnomusicology courses. At the conclusion of my undergraduate degree, I imagined a path towards academia and was most excited by that critical theory-informed musicology route. But upon graduating, I wanted to break from school and get a paycheck for a bit. So I thought about it for not too long and landed on teaching. Math teaching jobs were more prevalent than others, and the graduate school right by Pomona had a strong teaching master's program that sounded somewhat similar to some of those critical theory ideas from music. And the idea to teach mathematics differently to high schoolers, infusing more of that creativity and problem solving, well, that fit nicely into this plan as well. Claremont Graduate University's Master's in Teaching program was rooted in social justice. Our student teaching placements, like mine at nearby Pomona High School, required that as emerging teachers, we immediately engage with the stark differences in schooling experiences for students of color and white students, for those from the more affluent and the lower classes, and for the increasing number of English learner students in US schools. After student teaching, we were required to find jobs in high-need schools, and I taught at Duarte High School in Duarte, California, while completing the program. Our courses engaged concepts like culturally responsive pedagogy, critical race theory, critical pedagogy, in addition to the research and best practices of teaching and, yes, how to teach mathematics in a way that gets students to see that it is more than just plug and chug. The structure gave colleagues and me the ability to connect theory to practice on a consistent basis, always relating what we read and discussed to what we see and do, with the beautiful diversity and smart youth in our classrooms. After my first year of teaching, it was clear to me that I'd found a satisfying place to focus some time. I had much to improve upon my own teaching, and I also felt strongly about narrowing the opportunity gap between suburban and urban schools. When I moved back to my home state, New Jersey, I was eager to land a job to continue this newfound passion. I taught for 10 years at Columbia High School in Maplewood, South Orange, New Jersey. This district is unique, one of a handful of truly integrated schools at a time when schools have become increasingly segregated since the 1980s. It bridges that divide of urban and suburban, and with a student population that is roughly 50% Black students and 50% white students. Another attraction for working here were the many teachers that I could learn from and connect to. It was a place for innovation, and especially with respect to addressing the ways that schools could improve their ability to provide better opportunities for all, a real laboratory of social justice and teaching. It was at Columbia that I quickly found colleagues with whom to discuss concepts like Brazilian education theorist Paulo Freire. It was at Columbia that some of my first friends in the mathematics department also happened to be the faculty advisors for the high school's Facing Race student group. In my years there, I worked hard to break down barriers regarding obstacles that students faced. As the math team coach, I developed new structures that greatly increased participation by students of color and generally promoted more positive math identities for many. I wrote new curriculum and taught courses that worked against the tracking structures within the school, the ones that routinely position some students as more and others as less deserving of quality math teaching and learning. And like the Seattle curriculum, I integrated topics of social justice into my math teaching because just like those teachers announced to the world so clearly last fall, I found that my students became much more engaged with the mathematics when different motivations for learning the material surfaced. So as I started to feel good about teaching and settling into a routine, I felt a longing to return to academic study. And while the seeds of critical scholarship had been sown on a musical soil, they sprouted and took root with the sunlight and water of experiences with math and schools. I read and learned more, both about critical social theoretical frameworks and those scholars applying them to mathematics education. I sought out new teachers, like my English and social studies teaching colleagues, who pointed me to readings varying from Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk to Kropotkin's Mutual Aid. I consulted friends and teachers about my next steps. My favorite professor from my teacher education master's, Alejandra Favela, suggested I find a PhD program where I could study with Dr. Jean Anion. As luck would have it, I enrolled in City University of New York's Graduate Center Urban Education PhD program and had several classes with Dr. Anion. I also met and took many classes with Dr. Joel Spring, who became my advisor and mentor. These and many other courses fed what I now realized was the reason for shifting my teacher life. I wanted to produce knowledge in the research conversations around mathematics education and eager to contribute to that research connecting critical social theoretical frameworks to mathematics education. In those years, I realized that the teaching life to accompany this work would transition me from teaching mathematics to teaching people how to teach math. I taught in a variety of teacher education settings, from City College of New York to private liberal arts colleges like Drew and Muhlenberg, before landing on my new career identity as a public university teacher educator here at Kutztown University. An exact point in which I emerge as a scholar is hard to line up, beginning somewhere upon entering that PhD program and the process of coming into a variety of learned societies. Mine included American Educational Studies Association, my first home, and the giant that is American Educational Research Association. I complemented these by engaging in more specific mathematics education spaces, like the International Group for the Psychology of Mathematics Education, and Mathematics Education and Society, also an international group. And so you have a part of the backdrop to my work, and it's not to navel gaze. The point was to provide you with a set of my experiences as the context to my politics of math education. When talking to Ellie about this talk, she suggested that this was my attempt to dutifully show my work, as all good mathematicians do. We chuckled on the metaphor and also realized how demonstrating your work is all the more important when displaying something subjective, like the politics of math education. My early works here on the first slide were produced towards the end of my doctoral studies. To the left, we have my piece relating anarchism to mathematics education. Having read a good amount of anarchist theory with my teaching colleagues at Columbia High School, I felt that this piece could offer some complements to mathematics education related to other critical social perspectives, like Dr. Eric Rico Gutstein's Marxist perspective on mathematics education. And to clarify, there is a distinction between supporting anarchism as a political goal and using anarchism as a tool for analysis. In this article, I am not writing a political manifesto, but using key anarchist tenets like collectivism, mutual aid, and anti-hierarchy to analyze status quo mathematics education and propose curricular alternatives for differing goals. In this paper, I present key considerations in mathematics education practice that are in conflict with anarchist theory, including the relationship mathematics and mathematics education has with modern warfare and its relationship to a redistributive economics that flows money from the people and workers up to the elite. I also propose anarchist alternatives for mathematics education, seeing a pathway that it can provide for such things like statistics for social justice, or mathematics education that, dare I say it, could increase individual happiness. Quite the contrary to most of our experiences. In this article, I argue for the mathematics classroom as a non-coercive and happy place. The second image on this slide is my first book, which was the rewrite of my doctoral dissertation. Math Education for America examines the social network of national mathematics education policy. I'm going to read a bit from the book's introduction. Focusing on a social network surrounding a policy domain is different than, for example, looking at the text of specific policy documents, policies, or other events related to the domain. My choice represents a perspective on contemporary governance in which new forms of governing allow significant influence of private interests via a social network of individuals, private organizations, and their overlapping interests. The individuals and organizations that comprise this policy network, what I will refer to as network actors, initially congregate over similar interests surrounding the policy's domain, yet subsequently the alliances and compromises contained therein sometimes undermine both small-scale interests in the network as well as the overarching explicit goals of policy and government. By using this perspective on governance, I have identified a policy network surrounding math education for America that presents the following interrelated interests. A national math education that develops human capital, that's the characteristics of productive workers, debates over traditional and reform pedagogy, agreement on a content knowledge deficit of math teachers, and a math education that fuels an education services sector. In the introduction, I also declare how these interests compete in ways to undermine the purported goals of mathematics education that would increase math learning and teaching for all students in US public schools. Just to give a bit more sense to my method used in this book, I also share this image of one diagram, specifically the social network of actors taking part in a very important policy event in national mathematics education, the National Math Advisory Panel of 2008. The lower half on the diagram are the actual individual people who are actors in the event. I researched these people using publicly available information to link them to the organizations they have worked for or are affiliated with, and thereby bring with them to the table as part of the policy's social network. I gave types to both the individuals and organizations represented, and with quite a few that may or may not surprise you. Organizations like Honest, Open, Logical Debate, or HOLD, a group of elite academics and STEM professionals who, mostly motivated as parents, held conservative perspectives on keeping a tracked and traditional mathematics teaching practice that counters new cognitive science in mathematics education for all. Other organizations included representatives from all major industries at the time, including health and medical industries, financial services like hedge fund executives, military and energy executives, and of course, information and communication technology firms like Microsoft and Apple. An outgrowth to this research was to more broadly discuss mathematics education within its new context of STEM education. With my good friends and colleagues in STEM, Drs. Natalie Chesky and Johnny Lupinacci, we wrote careful critiques of mainstream STEM education policy that utilized philosophical methods describing the ontology or being of STEM education. Our book, the one that Natalie and I wrote, won the American Educational Studies Critics' Choice Book Award in 2016. In it, we collocate science, engineering, technology, and mathematics education by contrasting mainstream STEM policies with what we feel argue to be visionary alternatives. On technology, we borrow from Shoemaker's Technology with the Human Face, as we write, for Schumacher, lightening the burden of work does not mean devaluing work and attempting to eliminate it. The sense of mainstream education, STEM education, is the opposite, that in some ways, science and technology will deliver us from the burdens of work, perhaps even of the labor of living in our bodies. Scientist Ray Kurzweil has predicted that within 20 years, nanotechnologies will be capable of replacing all our vital organs and even reverse the aging process. This prediction, of course, could only be the case if science and technology continue to work hand in hand and are supported as they have been for the past 100 years. It would also require this progress remained unencumbered by significant obstacles, like an ecological catastrophe, for instance. Thus, we suggest that technology and STEM education be a responsive activity in which scientific knowledges are applied to global environmental and social justice. In the article that I wrote with Johnny and Natalie, that's on the slide as well, we applied philosopher of science Karen Barad's notion of a gentle realism to look at an ontology of STEM education. The diagram you see here indicates that the concept engages a triad of 3 pillars: a purported apolitical curricular trend to group together certain disciplines for a means to new ends in teaching and learning, a clear motive to prioritize STEM teaching learning for its ability to develop human capital, and related to this, but different in order of magnitude, a discursive episteme that fractures disciplines into the set of those that are deemed to have value, like the hard sciences, and those that do not, like the social sciences, humanities, and arts. We point to this as a dangerous fracturing of disciplines as the organization to our academic pursuits. Also with Natalie and Johnny, our specific attention to mathematics education has emerged in a curriculum studies project that asserts new directions for mathematics education, responsive to critical social theoretical frameworks related to, but different from, anarchism. Johnny is a leading expert in the concept of eco-justice education, a vision for a curriculum that embraces concepts like mutual aid and anti-hierarchy, drawing upon and connecting large bodies of critical scholarship in both critical social justice education, and environmental education. In publications like those referred to in the slide, we provide examples of ways that some mathematics education activities can encourage students to see the logic of domination at play, whether that be human supremacy, white supremacy, transphobia, male superiority, homophobia, English language supremacy, or ableism. The 9 years now that I've spent in a new teaching role, specifically teaching teachers how to teach mathematics, has steered my politics of mathematics education into research and writing that advances the conversations for practicing educators. On the right, you see an article that I authored in which I describe methods for teaching eco-justice within STEM teacher education courses. On the left is my third book, which I wrote for future and current mathematics teachers. My mission was to distill the conversations around mathematics teaching, and especially with a review of existing research that relate race, social class, and gender to mathematics education. Although I wrote it more geared to the actionable changes for teachers in the classroom, the American Educational Studies Association awarded me the book award for 2017 for this book, indicating its contribution to the research as well. I begin the third chapter on race. The chapter is titled A White Institutional Space. Since the summer of 2013, the United States Black Lives Matter movement has been calling attention to and protesting the routine murder of Black civilians through police brutality, as well as other injustices, such as the school-to-prison pipeline and disproportionate incarceration rates of African Americans. Their work continues the long struggle against white supremacy, drawing from the variety of groups and individuals in the civil rights movement, from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to the Black Panthers. Simultaneously, Black mathematics educators like Danny Martin have been asserting that mathematics education, and even specifically groups like the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, are a racialized project conceived of by whites and in their interest, and one that only superficially takes efforts towards addressing racial injustice as experienced through mathematics teaching and learning. This chapter aims to present to you the parallels in these pronouncements, to question how mathematics education perpetuates white supremacy, and in what ways we can teach critically to interrupt this. I feel compelled to note that these pieces, more decidedly in teacher education, my motivations to write them are tied to the amazing work of my secondary education department colleagues, all of my colleagues in the College of Education, our shared mission for improving teaching and learning for all students in US public schools. Thanks to the inspiration, motivation, and guidance from, again, Dr. Walsh Coates, Dr. George Sirakos, Dr. Amber Pabone, Dr. Andrew Minus, and Dr. Brendan Uzetta. Y'all are consistent motivators pushing me and each other to do right by all students. Together, we are a certain and formidable force enacting change on the ground in theory and practice. In closing, thank you to the Kutztown University Committee and administration for giving me this award. Thank you to President Hawkinson and Provost Zayitz. Thank you to Dr. Carol Wells and Brian Mears for help in arranging the talk. I'm so pleased to share the 2019 award with Dr. Amy Filer-Wunder, another education researcher who will give an exciting talk in a few weeks. This final slide of my research talk lists my publication productivity, and given the examples presented in the recent slides, I conclude by answering generally, what is Mark Wolfmeyer's politics of math education? Reminder that this is a subjective description of a politics that is grounded by my experiences and method of currere. Mathematics education, as it typically occurs in policy and practice, is fraught with problems. Schools track students into buildings, and math classrooms further divide up the students so that everyone gets different experiences. These differential opportunities associate along racial, social class, and gender divisions, where some are afforded better opportunities to identify with mathematics, and where many others are simply told to follow rules and leave it be. The structure lends itself to institutional declarations that value some people over others, but all in service to developing those intangible qualities that businesses will use to seek greater profit margins. But what could math education be? To that, I answer the questions I posed in the opening vignettes from fall 2019. Again, those questions are, what mathematical content should be prioritized in public schools? What pedagogy or method of teaching should be utilized by teachers? Who should learn mathematics in public schools and for what reason? Who gets to decide the answer to these questions? So here it is. My Politics of Math Education prioritizes the mathematics classroom as a non-coercive and happy place. Teaching mathematics in all its forms, plug and chug, reasoning and problem solving, applied mathematics, mental math, all of this can lead to personal happiness and a positive math identity. Some will prefer one aspect, others another. Practical application for mathematics in the mathematics classroom should focus on solving social and environmental crises. It can also relate to a host of exciting interests that our students have. Everyone should be exposed to the variety of mathematical behaviors, allowed to flourish in whichever are personally satisfying, and the methods for engaging in mathematics should reflect the diversity of human experience, culture, human diversity, all the ways we are different. Decisions around mathematics education should be made by people and for people. The conversation can focus on the aims to maximize individual liberties and collective strength. And most importantly, such decisions can involve a community of teachers, researchers in the field, parents. But please, can we put students front and center in this conversation and allow them as much decision-making power as all the rest? Thanks to all of you for listening, taking time out of your busy lives to listen to this today. I'm available to answer questions. Some of them have maybe appeared on the Q&A Zoom feature, and I wish you all a great evening. Thank you.
So Mark, my understanding is that people can write questions in the Q&A and I will read them for you. There aren't questions right now, so I'm going to ask my own while people can think of the questions that they want to ask. So first of all, Mark, when I was being certified to teach math, there were math wars and there was fights over the NCTM standards. But the politics then were about questions like, should we do formal proofs or informal proofs in geometry courses? So you definitely expanded my understanding of the politics of math in your talk, as I knew you would. Okay, so here's my question. Your work is deeply theoretical, but I also know you working with you that you're someone who likes to dig into solving pragmatic problems. So kind of a pragmatic problem faced by a high school math teacher might be that universities use math and certain measures of math achievement as gateways, and they're gateways to go into different professions. So how would you advise a new math teacher to structure their classes to achieve your goals, but yet allow their students to be successful in the world as it kind of is as they go into university?
Thank you for the question, John. I couldn't agree more with that sort of dilemma that you're posing around working inside and outside the system, kind of is how I think of it. I really value colleagues, scholars in other content areas like in English, Lisa Del Pitt, who writes about the concept of language of power and code switching. So the idea is, let's say we want to continue to foster the literacy practices in a student's culture, and then also teach students in that language of power to be successful in life, in college, in the structures that currently exist. So in my own teaching practice and sort of in my message, in my classes, in my mathematics teaching, it's this and I'm quoting my colleague Johnny here, like simultaneously oppose and propose and work within the system so that you are allowing students to have those pathways for success, but you're also proposing new ways of doing mathematics in your classroom. So as a concrete example, in my years in teaching at Columbia, I became, for a while, a couple of years in a row, I was teaching the class for students who are at risk of failing the standardized test. And I really enjoyed teaching that class because we could first provide a little bit of context to what's the policy around standardized tests. Why am I assigned a second mathematics course? And kind of name that, connect our individual experiences to broader policy, and then engage with it in that kind of Lisa Del Pitt mindset of, we have to do this. We have to succeed in the mathematics in the way that it's structured, the mathematics education program, the way it's structured. And then at the same time, we actually would finish, it was kind of a lucky situation, we would finish the test in early spring, and that afforded all of this opportunity for a free math experience, a math classroom. My students would do beautiful work in engaging their interests with, say, for example, to quote Edward Tufte, the visual display of quantitative information. So they would make these amazing statistical displays like the New York Times relating to the interests that, like you see in the New York Times, relating to the interests that they might have. Many of them chose to focus on social justice topics. My students had success with the standardized test score, also more of an affirming understanding of what it is around these structures at play in school. And then also, I hope, found kind of a new appreciation of how math could fit into their lives.
Thank you. I have a couple questions I'm gonna read, and I'm not gonna say the person's name. I apologize for that, but because this is being recorded, I'm not gonna say the names. Anyways, the first question is, what are some specific examples of ways we can use your research and advice in our classrooms?
So I think the specific things in the classrooms, this was the hard copy version. I didn't have the paperback one, but the one that's got the more fun cover is really that practitioner guide, covering a lot of detail around the ways that, and the theory and research and practice around what can happen in the classroom. So I'll give an example that's going to be in the rewrite that isn't given a lot of space in here, but it's something I'm currently working on. That's what's coming to mind. We've heard a lot about in discussions in the last couple of years relating, especially relating to conversations around race, the notion of a racial microaggression. So racial and microaggressions can occur in classroom spaces, and that impacts mathematics teaching and learning. So they can occur in a lot of different ways and forms. I will have some examples written out there for, it's not intended, right? But it's the difference between the impact, the intention and the impact is where a racial microaggression can occur, maybe from peer to peer or teacher to student. So there's those practical examples in this book around what you can do. On the other side, the other answer to the question is, some of the articles I have are very clear curricular proposals. So those of us in the College of Ed understand, or know about understanding by design is that curricular framework. And so I've authored lesson unit plans that use that curricular framework as examples for what this can look like in the classroom. And on that note, the kind of goal is to make sure that you are working with the standards that you are, hired to teach, and also you're, supposed to be teaching it effectively to students. So how are you connecting it? And there's enough research out there, and like the Seattle teachers are suggesting, to show that engaging social justice and environmental justice topics in STEM and mathematics teaching increase the learning. So you have enough sort of rationale, reason behind doing that work, and we have some examples for you, and especially the co-author publications that I provided.
Okay. Next question. First of all, person starts out by saying, thank you for a great presentation. Then the question, how do you see the politics of mathematics education speaking to our current moment of political, social, cultural, global crisis and confusion? What are your connections between a mathematics classroom online today with what is going on globally and internationally?
Yeah, so where to start with that question? What I see, when I read from the last book, I think clearly the connection, or the momentum and uh, the racial injustice over the summer has continued, of course, and the momentum around the social movement is even bigger, and it's global now than it was in when I wrote this a few years ago. So I think there's a lot more attention to what I'm talking about, what people, not me, but lots of folks have been talking about, and really prioritizing this in the math education arena. So like I mentioned, Danny Martin, just a few years ago, it was National Council of Teachers of Mathematics we were really thinking, what can we do better about race and mathematics education? And it was kind of a new conversation for many people who were more on the inside, and more, folks were just starting to bring this up. But this is really now has quite a bit of attention in mathematics education, and especially this summer. Another related, I anticipated this kind of a question. We've got the momentum around the social movement against racial injustice. We also have turmoil politically, how I would characterize it right now, and this potential of history speeding up. I'm quoting from Slavoj Žižek, I heard him say that once, and that's stuck with me since. But one thing that's sped up kind of quickly that's confronting a lot of folks right now is, and the work that we do is the presidential administration's announcement against critical race theory and the use of anti-discrimination efforts in federally funded spaces. And I'm already seeing this work impacting colleagues at other universities. So I'm watching that and curious to see how that's going to play out.
Those are the, oh, wait a minute, maybe, I got to scroll, I'm sorry. And I don't know if there's quite a few questions, so we'll see how far it goes. And okay, so the next question is, thanks for this talk and your work. I'm wondering if you think decisions about math education should be made at the local level or by school districts, or to what degree might state or national standards be helpful? Especially, I'm adding to the question in light of your relationship of some of your theory to anarchy. I actually want to hear more about that.
So, yeah, I mean, on the last point with anarchism, the idea and using it, I kind of have more of a realpolitik, Noam Chomsky, working with what the structures are, but with this sort of ideal vision in mind of, collective shared decision-making. I think that mathematics education, for me, as I kind of ended, I think needs to be, the conversation, those decisions really need to involve the students much more. I know it sounds funny, if you haven't heard it before, but I do believe that even elementary school students can engage and make choices in the kind of learning that they're doing. But at the same time, caregivers, teachers, experts in education have a big knowledge base, especially the experts in teacher education, and the teachers have a knowledge base to contribute to those conversations. So, a forum where people are representing those perspectives and kind of given some of the weight that they deserve given their experience is something that would be a part of that shared decision-making. But you can look to examples, something I was really inspired by and kind of tried to do in public school teaching were some of the historical and current versions of different schooling spaces like the free schools, Summerhill, which have some, you know, pros and cons. Everybody has different critiques and emphases for what makes them special. So there's something to look to think about, you know, how can students be making decisions around their own education as well.
Okay, and there are several more questions, but I'm gonna pick one and ask one more. And I know you said before the presentation that I think you're gonna get a record of the questions, and so perhaps you'll have a chance to answer directly afterwards. So the last question I'm gonna ask is, how do you switch the deficit lenses of teachers and curriculum developers to build minority learners to maintain an interest in math?
Okay, so even right there, so I mean, and it's interesting because the question poses the concept of deficit perspectives, which I really appreciate being named and giving me a chance to talk about that. So deficit perspectives are kind of like an ongoing racial microaggression, if we think about it for race, but it can be applied for social class or gender too, where you're focusing in on what students don't have, what they're missing. But can you read the question one more time? Because the second half of it spun it on its head for me.
How do you switch, I hope I read it right, how do you switch the deficit lenses of teachers and curriculum developers to build minority learners to maintain an interest in math?
Right, so for me, I think students of color, English learners, other categories, identity markers for students who, you know, we have some statistical sense through the standardized testing don't seem to identify as mathematics students, it's really not true. So there's mathematical behavior and practice for, you know, all variety of human behavior, you know, all the diversity in humans. And so the way we express mathematical behavior is not the same, and it's certainly not the way it's not entirely just the way that we test it in scores. So the response to the question for me is that I don't see this sort of identity, this lack of identity for mathematics as a deficit in students of color or in other groups. But to the point of curriculum developers, I think that, you know, one of the concerns I have with some of the resurgence and momentum behind the social movement that took place this summer especially, is that sometimes it is just like kind of in name only. Like we suddenly found many new places announcing Black Lives Matter, like Amazon. And I'm wanting to see what that looks like. And so I think curriculum developers are in name on board for addressing these issues, but I think it's going to be consistent social movements like anything. You know, electing a president is one thing, but the social movement is what makes things happen for policy. So, you know, it's going to continue to be momentum around the teachers on the ground, researchers, to be really continuing the focus for the conversation and demanding those changes.
Thank you, Mark. Dr. Zayats, do you want to say anything to close, or do we?
Sure. I'd really like to thank everybody for joining this webinar this afternoon, and I certainly want to thank Dr. Wolfmeyer for enlightening us with the politics of mathematics. It is a subject that we all can begin to think about and act on for sure. So thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate it. I'd also like to point out in 2 weeks, we have another Chambliss lecture, Dr. Amy Filer-Wonder, and I hope that some of you will be encouraged to join us for that as well. Otherwise, have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for coming.